Guys, great lunch, by the way. I hope you enjoyed it. It was great to get to visit with some of you guys a little more informally. One of the things that we'd like to take just a few minutes to talk about are salting in a few additional resources. I mentioned this to one of the small groups I was visiting with earlier. One of the things that particularly in this part of the country, and particularly in the greater D.C. area, you've already mentioned the tremendous ethnic and racial diversity of the area. Even where we're living outside of Richmond, our townhouse complex is probably, I bet we could easily find 15 different ethnicities just within the 100 or so units that are around where we live. A lot of South Asians from India and other parts of Indonesia and so forth. A lot of Middle Easterners, Hispanics, Africans, just in our little area. It's almost like a mini United Nations in some ways. So, and that's very descriptive of a lot of our areas around here. Because people are coming in as government contractors, or in a lot of ways they're refugees themselves. As I mentioned, I think earlier, we're working with an English, practicing English language club, and we've got several different ethnicities coming to that. So there are great opportunities. But one of the things that you may want to bear in mind is that sometimes our terminology, even spiritually, may not fit them. And let me give you an example of it. We ran into this many times in Vancouver. When you're talking to a Muslim and you talk about sin, often they'll say, well, that doesn't include me, I don't sin. And what their meaning is, I've not committed murder. I haven't, at least nobody knows if I've committed adultery, and I haven't blasphemed Allah, so I'm okay. I don't sin. I'm not a bad person. And what you may need to ask them is, well, have you ever brought shame on your family? And they'll raise their eyebrows and they'll say, well, yeah, I've done that. And that is their version, if you will, of sin. There's a great resource. I've kind of scribbled it up here. If you're interested in knowing more about this, a friend of ours is Roland Mueller, and he's written a book called The Message, Messenger, and Community. And you can get that online. It's available in downloads on Kindle and a lot of different formats. He has worked for 30 or 40 years with Islamic people, but he has developed a treatment of 3 ways of looking at worldviews that goes beyond just Middle Eastern or Islamic. It's a good way to look at worldwide worldviews. He breaks it into 3 categories. Let me just hit these very quickly. The first one is what he calls honor and shame. That's very typical among Asian people and Middle Eastern people, where the group is more important than the individual, and it's important that you don't do something that shames or dishonors your family or your village, your tribe, or whatever that would be. A good bad example of that is the so-called honor killings that happen among Middle Eastern families and South Asian Indian families, where a girl marries the wrong guy and they feel like it's shamed the family, and they'll put out a contract on her, or they'll just take her out themselves, and that's so supposedly justified, or at least winked at with the society, because they're preserving the honor of the family. So as you talk about sin, you may need to talk about shame as opposed to just doing something wrong. For more African and animistic cultures, and this would apply in much of Central and South America under Catholicism, there's what's called fear and power, where somebody has power like the evil eye or a shaman, witch doctor in the village, or there's a god tree in the village that has all these evil spirits in it, and that's power that I don't have, so I need to stay away from them and be afraid of that kind of power. Or if I have that power, I have dominance over other people. And so again, who has power, who you're afraid of, that helps you to understand their perspective rather than from a Western view. We tend to think right and wrong, black and white, just, unjust. Where what we say is sin, you do something wrong. Again, the Islamic guy may say, well, I hadn't done anything wrong because I have a different scale of what's right and wrong. Or the animistic fear and power guy may say, well, it doesn't really matter. I just need to stay away from the guy that's got the power or the source of the power. So understanding those things really helps us as we deal with people from different backgrounds to have a better understanding on our part that sometimes what we say may translate either figuratively or literally differently to their worldview than our own. And doing a little research, if you've got a lot of different ethnic groups around you, spend a little time just asking them, maybe asking believers within those worldview groups, what among your people is the best way to describe sin, and some things like that, which may help you not being misunderstood or not being able to communicate effectively. That's a really good resource if you're interested in knowing more about how to reach people who are more community oriented and more have a different worldview than what we do. We're very individualistic as Americans and Westerners. And many people coming from other cultures are quite different in that they value more what the village or the family and those kinds of things is what we do. So that's a good resource that you might want to pick up and check out at some point. Another thing that as you're talking to people from other ethnic groups, particularly if they're relatively new to the U.S., is sometimes the questions, depending on where they're from, the questions that we ask them, just trying to get to know them and find out a little bit about them, can be perceived as too prying, where you're actually kind of like the KGB, or if they're from China, then if you say, well, where do you live? Where'd you come from? Where do you work? How long have you been here? What kind of work do you do? You know, before long, it begins to be an interrogation. And so you have to kind of be careful that just in our desire to know more about who they are so that we'll know how to talk to them, we don't create a setup that they think, ooh, what's this guy really after here? So, again, you don't have to be paranoid about it, but just be sensitive to some of that. And you can tell by body language a lot of times. They come on very friendly, and then they begin to kind of clam up and get a little cold and resistant to you, then you probably crossed a line there that you weren't aware maybe was even in existence. So those are some things that will help. And maybe you found some other resources like that you would want to share. Has anybody found anything like that or insights? Yeah.
I recently learned from a Lebanese-born advisor to my company that we often sometimes equate Arab-speaking individuals to automatically be Muslim.
Right.
And to her point, she says, do you know why they live in the Western world? They live in Europe and the U.S. Why are they here? And I didn't have an answer. She goes, because they're persecuted Christians that purposely left their home country. So don't assume that because they speak and write Arabic that they are automatically Muslim. More than not, they're actually Christians. So don't be so afraid to engage in a conversation just because you assume that they're Muslim by the language they speak and the language they write in.
And there's a difference between being Middle Eastern and Persian. And often Persians find it offensive to call them an Arab because they don't consider themselves in many cases to be Arabic or Arabic speaking. They speak Farsi or a derivative of that kind of language, and they are very proud to call themselves Persian rather than Arab. And again, just asking some questions and again, using your ignorance as an opportunity to find out more about them. And that's ingratiating. That helps you to have an inroad to knowing who they are and having a better idea of how to talk to them and what's appropriate and what may not be so appropriate. And a lot of times we have assumptions that are not accurate just the same way that they may have inaccurate assumptions. Something else? Anything? I just wanted to be sure that you got this information, because these are some good resources to follow up with if you're so inclined to do a little research and find out a little bit more about reaching people from other worldviews. Okay? Ken?
All right, let's do another quick rewind. What have you heard so far today? What's sticking out in your brain at the moment? Let's see. This is when we ought to have free time. No, we're Bill right now because I know you're going to sleep. No, so let's. God
never intended it to be
Okay. Good. Breaks or no? What?
Have lost friends.
Have lost friends. Good.
Well, just how putting the loss at the top of the triangle. I mean, that just reshapes your priorities.
Are you familiar with a website called meetup.com?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
That's, if you want to find lost people, that's a great way. If you've got an interest, fly fishing, or, you know, I mean, there's some weird stuff out there, but if you want to find where people are gathering and responding to groupings, that's a good place to look at it and find common interest. And most of the time, they won't be personal.
Yeah. Okay. All right. We get on through.
Did that one?
Did we get to that one?
Yep.
Okay, we got to that one. I want to pause here too, because the prodigal son story is not the only story that you can tell in different situations. And if you're going to use this, if you're going to insert Bible stories into conversations, it's a great thing to do. There's just one catch, and that is you got to know the stories. So one of the things you want to do is be sure you know the stories and how you can use them and where you can put them, how they will apply in different situations. But you want to be sure that that as you, like I said, as you start to insert some of these stories, if you can, not start off with, well, you know, I was in church the other day and I heard this Bible story, let me tell you how I think it applies. If you're in a situation where you can, that's great. But many times, you know, that's just not the way to start it for people to listen, because of all the baggage that that some of the terminology is carrying with it today, thanks to media and what is being said for that. We mentioned mention of faith and religion. Faith, we already talked about that one. An opportunity to give God credit for things. A good place for this is at your doctor's office. Anything positive that he says, man, your blood pressure's good, heart rate's good, just anything positive that can be said, giving God credit for it. My wife, I think, is the world's best at this. She is just real good about wherever she goes, somebody says something positive, she just says, you know, God's good, isn't he? Isn't he good just that, you know, you know, somebody will say, it's a beautiful day. She goes, did not God do a good job today? Isn't it just great? Or she's had some medical issues recently, and when she gets some good news about it, you know, the doctor or one of the nurses will say, hey, this is a good report and everything. She goes, yeah, gosh, it's been really good to me lately. And she just, you know, she's just, you know, just good about doing that kind of thing, looking for an opportunity to share those kind of things. She was getting her, I don't know, what do you call it when women get their hair cut?
Expensive.
Styled, whatever that
Done.
is, okay. Thank you for that.
We will add recording.
Two.
Yeah, I like that.
Too bad.
You sound like me now. So, anyway, she was getting her hair done, whatever they did to it the other day. And I don't say that to her. That is just,
Or you could.
it's in the clip to her, she'll appreciate it. And she goes, well, guess what happened to me today? I said, what's that? She goes, while I was sitting in the chair, I was talking to the lady, you know, doing my hair, and I was just asking, you know, how are things going today, and fine, and all this kind of stuff. And the lady just out of the blue said, you know, I had a customer tell me that she goes to this church and they talk about this thing called the gospel. Do you have any idea what she's talking about? I looked at her and went, that's just not fair. I said, I don't get things like that. That's just not fair.
That's assault.
Your hair's not on.
And I don't know my hairstyle. And so she got to sit there, because she was there for like an hour and a half or something. She got to sit there and just go through this elongated version of who Christ was, what He did for us, just this whole thing with her. And, you know, the lady didn't, you know, stop and fall to her knees and receive Christ or anything, but she heard the whole story. And she said, you know, that's really interesting. I'd like to hear more. And so, you know, when Patty goes back, she's going to be able to share, you know, more with her. And, you know, it's just because she lives that kind of lifestyle where she's looking, you know, just looking to see where God's working. She's always, you know, saying, I'm going to give God credit for whatever's happening around me. She can just walk into those situations. And I say those two stories like that is because I just really believe God honors that. And I think He just honors a lifestyle that says, I'm looking, I'm looking, I'm looking. And so she really inspires me and puts me to shame most of the time, the way she's able to do that. We talked about good things, health, weather, coincidence. We always, when we talk about things that are happening, I try to say, you know, I don't believe in coincidence, like Bill was saying. Our meeting wasn't a coincidence. Oh, this happened in the world today. No, I don't think it was a coincidence. I think,
I try to stay away from saying luck.
yeah, or luck. You know, I think God's got a plan. You know, and just trying to turn that conversation that way. And you know, these are not major things. And again, I just want to keep saying over and over again, not every conversation is just going to jump right into a gospel presentation. But what you're trying to do is you're trying to change your thinking, change your habits, and change the way that you engage and talk to people, to where you're consciously thinking, how can I turn this conversation? How can we move to the gospel? How can we move to Jesus? How can we move to spiritual things? And that just becomes a normal thing in your life instead of it being an event. When I was growing up in church, we had Monday night visitation. We went to the church. There were visitation cards sitting out on a long table. We went through them. And you know what you do when you're going through them? You're trying to pick the ones you think either not going to be at home or either going to be really easy to talk to. It was the filtering process. And so we found those. We went and we talked to people. And we came back. We We put them back down after making a little note and everything, and then we were done. We had done our duty to talk to people about Jesus for the entire week. The idea of this being just a lifestyle of as we were going, as the Great Commission says, just wasn't, that's just not how I was raised. And I'm not, trying to badmouth the church that I grew up in or anything. That was just the way it was. And then we had the different evangelistic plans that came out, EE and CWT and BWR and XYZ and, all the initials they gave them and everything. And it was a push to try to get us to do that. So now we're just trying to say, let's just make conversations a norm that we're trying to turn as we do that. Someone asks you questions like, what do you do for a living or job? And we've already touched, on this. How do you talk about that? Because everybody wants to know, well, so what do you do? Hey, my name is Ken, your name is Tom, so what do you do? That's just an automatic question. What do you do? When we're preparing our missionaries to go overseas, we have to get them ready to answer two questions. Why are you here, and who pays your salary? And those are two really important questions for them, many of them for where the places they're going. Because a lot of times the guys are free to move around all day long and they don't have this job they go to. So everybody in the neighborhood is watching and they're living in the house just like they are and they're going, well, where's their money coming from? And so they've got to be able to answer those questions. So, it's different here, obviously, but what do you do? And so how do you answer that? How do you turn that to a spiritual conversation? And we talked about one of the ways that we can do that. We talked about why you're taking your family overseas is one that was sort of left over from what we do. What we do with our missionaries as we get them ready to go. But if you look at other questions, like the other why questions, why are you doing something else? Why are you going there for vacation? Why are you doing something else? Being able to answer the why question, not just because this is what I do, but I do it because I'm led by God to do this. How do you bring Christ into everything that we do? Because I'd like to believe that Christ, being Lord of our life, impacts every decision we make, is involved in everything that we do. So how do we communicate that with people as we're having these conversations with folks? Okay, so let me pause there. Any questions about anything we've said to this point? Any astrophysicists? Okay, good. I can say this is not rocket science. Okay? And I understand that, but it is habits. And it takes a while to build a habit. If you hear something that allows you to ask a person if you can pray for them and explain why prayer is so important to you, and you can give a testimony about prayer, you will be surprised how many people will let you pray for them. But let's talk about this a little bit. There are many different ways that you can pray for people and ways that you can approach this. There are times and situations where you can ask, can I pray for you? And you can actually stop right there and pray for them. It's very appropriate. It's not going to embarrass them in any way. It's just a good thing to do. When you can do that, please do that. There are other times when you can ask, can I pray for you? And you're going to scare the person to death because they think you're about to make a scene. And you don't want to do that. And so there are different ways to tell people or to offer people an opportunity to pray for them. You can say, can I pray for you at another time? Like, I'm going to pray for you later. Say, I'm going to pray for this need for you. Or can we step over here and let me pray for you? I'd love to pray for you right now. Can we step over here and pray for you? Or I would really like to pray for this need. And I want you to know that I'm going to pray for this need. And I promise to do that. Is there any way I can get back in touch with you? to let you know that I prayed for this need. And sometimes people will give you some kind of contact, an email, not normally a phone number, but they'll, or yeah, I'll be back over here tomorrow, you can tell me, or sometimes they go, no, I really don't have anything. Okay, that's fine. But I want you to know I'm going to be praying for you. But find out a way that you can express this in a way that's, again, not weird. Because people don't want to be in the middle of the grocery store aisle, and you're standing there and going, oh Lord, we just want to lift up Tommy here with you and everything, and people are walking by and they're, because they probably won't have their head bowed and their eyes closed, they're looking to see who's watching. And so you want to make them feel comfortable in that process. Along with this, especially if you can't actually pray with them, you can give a testimony of how prayer has changed your life and how it's impacted your life. And why you told them, I want to pray for you. And can I just tell you real quick why? Someone prayed for me, and this is what happened. And it just allows you to get into that discussion with them. Another way that you can take this topic of prayer and turn like a cultural discussion to a spiritual discussion. I find it really interesting how we as a nation keep talking about how we want to have separation of church and state, how we don't want to insert God into so many things that are taking place in our nation and everything right now. But what is the first thing our leaders say when there's a disaster? We need to come together and pray. Seems odd. Every time I hear it, it just seems odd to me.
God bless America.
Yeah.
They always end the speech, God bless America.
Yeah, and the end of their speech of God bless America. That's just a great transition to be able to talk to people about. But can you pray for people? And like I said, you'll be surprised at how many people will let you actually pray for them. Back to that one right there. Okay, what time is it? 1:30? Good, we've been 30 minutes. Okay, this is what I want you to do. I want you to stand up.